After e4, e6, d4, black can play the French Benoni variation with c5. The right move now is d5 for white. We're going to go through two main moves, knight f6 or pawn takes. The thing is that the black player has already compromised the control of the center. This is a typical pattern where the black player simply doesn't have the square c6 to go to with the knight. Black can't just play like knight a6 with the idea of going to c7 maybe, or like, trying to get the knight into the game, because after knight a6 white will play d6 and the game is a joke. Not to mention that the pawn in d6 will be able to be supported by e5. So let's go through some normal moves. Let's start from knight f6. White continues with knight c3, and now the funny thing is that this is such a bad defense that most moves would be forced. There's not much to do. Like, how is black going to develop the dark square bishop? It could go to e7, but you can attack it from d6. It's ridiculous. You can't go to d6 because of a bunch of forcing moves. Knight b5 attacks the bishop, threatening to take it, and the bishop will have to go back. But when he does, whatever he goes, you got d6, you got the knight check. Chess players of any level would be able to enjoy this game. So after this move, the queen check is completely pointless because you can attack the queen. The knight is defended by the bishop. The queen will have to move again. So let's say bishop d2. The queen has to move again, but she can't lose control of the bishop. Queen c7 is not possible, so queen b6. And now white plays queen e2 with a threat of e5. Position is evaluated almost +2, so it's already very comfortable from the start. So let's make a recap, and we continue from that line. d5 comes now, so we're looking at knight f6 and now knight c3. And where's black going to play the bishop? We can't really do it. So let's go through this move, which is pawn takes. How to punish this move? d5, attacking the knight immediately. Black cannot play a move like d4 to counterattack the knight here, because you can simply take the knight and you're up a piece. If black takes this, then you've got a check, and black will have to give up a minor piece for nothing. In this position, let's see two main moves. Knight e4, saving the knight. You can just take in d5. White is already so much better here. So black can't really develop anything. I mean, he can play the knight, but still, white's going to play queen e2. And then the knight is trapped. So in this position, let's see, for instance, d6, the idea of being able to protect the knight. Well, then queen e2, and after bishop to f5, g4 will do the job for the white player. The bishop can't take the pawn. And after bishop to g6, for example, bishop g2, there's double attack on the knight. There's nowhere to go for the knight. So queen a5 check, desperate move, c3, nothing's going to happen. And after best move, which is take the pawn, allowing the knight to potential retreats. Well, that's too late because you can take, and now black realizes he's down in development. So knight c6, for example. These are just example moves how to finish the capitalization. Knight f3, and after rook d8, white's best move is simply to take the bishop, and yeah, white's completely winning. This position, if the bishop had not moved but rather played pawn takes, discovering an attack on the knight with the black queen, then simply take, and after queen takes knight, bishop g2 will do the job. After e4, e6, d4, and c5, white continues with d5. We are still looking at this line, knight f6, knight c3, and then pawn takes. So now we attack the knight. We need to look at this variation, queen e7, pinning the pawn, how to continue. Queen e2, unpinning it, so now we're threatening the knight, and now we're also threatening to take the pawn d5. It's going to be a disaster soon, so knight e4, simply knight takes d5, and after queen e5, protecting the square c7 from the usual fork, white defends the knight with c4. Now white is threatening to play f3, so black's most active response is bishop to d6. The idea is that the bishop is now defending the queen can also go somewhere else, the knight can go somewhere else, and the bishop now is reinforcing the defense of the square c7. White continues with the amazing bishop f4. Of course, the queen can't take the bishop, so after queen e6, staying close to this bishop for protection, still white's gonna take it, and the queen can't take back because then the black player will lose the knight. So after knight a6, best move, white simply plays this cheeky bishop e7 move. There was nothing else to do. Like in this position, knight takes bishop is also not possible, obviously because of knight c7. So the game was over. One more line we need to look at is the one with knight f6, knight c3, bishop's development. So we mentioned that bishop e7 is met by d6, and then the bishop can only go back, and now e5. And the knight cannot move anywhere except d5 and g8. Well, if he goes to g8, then knight to b5, threatening to win a queen, literally. And of course, queen a5 check doesn't work because you can attack the queen with a minor piece and the threat remains. So after knight a6 stopping that c7 attack, h4, white just leaves it like that, right? Black players simply cannot move anything. White has a plan now of playing queen e2 and bishop g5, so the h4 pawn is there to support the bishop. And so if black were to stop the pawn by playing something like this, h5 for instance, then white just plays bishop to d3, and just black cannot develop anything. Knight h6 would be met by queen winning a pawn for free. The idea of trying to fianchetto this bishop is met by bishop g5. It's deadly. This cannot be blocked by f6, simply because bishop g6 is checkmate. But even then, after h4, if black plays g6, it doesn't play h5, then you can play h5. And after a move like h6, this bishop becomes just the greatest joke. And developing is just impossible. Let's see, bishop g7 attacking the pawn is simply met by knight f3, and h6 is coming eventually. The pawn in f6, right now you might argue that maybe can happen because white doesn't have that light square bishop with a double attack on g6, for example. But then you can just take the pawn. And now two main options. If black finally takes the pawn in e5, trying to obviously reduce the control of the center of these two white pawns, then white takes on e7 with an attack on the knight, trying to win a piece. So after knight f6, knight h6 was not possible because there was double attack on it. So knight e5 comes now. And unfortunately, even though there's two attackers on h7, this cannot be taken. The black king is completely blockaded, right, everywhere. That means, because this bishop is completely useless, this rook is not playing, this knight can never move. What this means is that you can go and threaten this f6 knight. You have an idea of playing queen h5. This is going to be a disaster. Position is evaluated as +7, so we can move on. And in this position, we went through pawn takes in the center in e5. If instead black simply recaptures in g6, then swap rooks, and then the thematic knight h4. After which you're threatening knight g6 and then queen h5. It's going to be very easy endgame. Look how funny it is that this queen just can never play. Position is evaluated about +550, so I mean you can tell, look at this king.